Welcome to another episode of Million Dollar Stories, where we get to interview authors from all over the world. I love talking to authors because most likely they have a commitment to a craft, something that I may not know much about. And they have the courage to take their lessons and their stories, put it down in a book, and share it with the many, ultimately changing their legacy and destiny in the process. And if you want to write a book out there, I recommend you check out Dream Starters Publishing. We can help you out with wherever you're at in the process in the book creation aspects. And also, if you have a book, you want to generate leads with it for your business, check out bookmarketingcrm.com. Now, this next guest is an expert in something I know nothing about, but I'm always curious about how it comes to be when it comes to the skyline, the huge buildings downtown or New York City or Dubai. And this guy is the foremost expert that I've talked to in this world. So it is an honor to have Jason Barr on our show. He wrote a book called Cities in the Sky: The Quest to Build the World's Tallest Skyscrapers. And his book is coming out on Tuesday. I guess it's Tuesday the 14th, somewhere in there,
Correct.
right?
Exactly.
So if you guys can take a look at it, I think you will hear this the day of. So it might be the 14th when you hear it. So pick it up, check it out. And it is an honor. Thanks so much for being here, Jason Barr.
It's great to be here. Thanks for inviting me.
Well, let's start off with the genesis of this book. This is your second one, but what made you want to write Cities in the Sky? And if you can give us a quick little background on where you come from and how you got into this world, that'd be helpful too.
Sure. So in terms of background, I'm a professor of economics at Rutgers University, Newark, which is in New Jersey. And well, I grew up on Long Island and always just really been interested in New York City history. Developed an interest in skyscrapers probably in my 20s, just kind of walking around the city. So when I went to when I started teaching at Rutgers, um, I just thought, wouldn't it be fun to do some economics research related to my interest, New York City? And so that's kind of led to the my first book about which is called Building the Skyline. That's about the history of the Manhattan skyline. And after that, I thought, okay, well, what's next? So why not do something about take my passion for cities and tall buildings and explore that globally. So that's kind of what led to this book that's coming out next week, Cities in the Sky.
Nice. So whenever I was growing up, I was born in 1984. I grew up in Pittsburgh, Pennsylvania. Still live here to this day. And the Empire State Building, right? That's the one that always stood out as the biggest building in the world. I always thought as a kid. And then I
Right.
realized what I'm looking at your book here. It says it's only 1,200 feet.
Yeah.
You have now the Shanghai Tower, which is almost double that.
Yeah.
And it's only getting crazier, probably because of technology, but also yeah, I would say probably because of technology or maybe just understanding of architecture in general. So, did your love of this grow from maybe, seeing the Empire State Building? Obviously, you're not too far away in New Jersey.
Yeah, no, absolutely. Actually, I have from my office in Newark, I'm on the eighth floor. Actually, on a clear day, I could see the Empire State Building. Yeah, I've always loved the Empire State Building. I mean, to me, it's always been a symbol of New York's, like, New York City's like a strivers town, and that's the ultimate symbol of strivers. That building which was completed in 1931 was built by the developers were Al Smith, who was actually the former governor of New York City and ran for president of the United States in 1928, and his friend John Raskob, who was a General Motors executive and like a sort of a Wall Street guru, and in the late 1920s, they basically were out of work, and they're like, "What should we do now?" Okay, well, let's develop a skyscraper, and they're like, "Screw this, let's make it the world's tallest building." And then they saw Walter Chrysler building the Chrysler Building 10 blocks to the north, and they said, "Well, Chrysler seems like he's trying to build his building taller than ours, so." Let's go even taller. And I think when you look at the Empire State Building today, because of that height competition, is actually a better building than if it was just the original design that Smith and Raskob had, which was not as elegant. And so what they did was to make their building taller, they added what today is the spire, but that was originally that spire part that's lit up at night. That was originally intended to be a mooring mast for airships. So they came up with this scheme that they were going to add that spire, and on the top of the spire, They thought airships would come across from Europe and they would dock at the top of the Empire State Building, and people would just get out and they would take the elevators down and they'd be on the street in like 10 minutes. So they did some experiments in 1930 with airships to try to dock them, and it was just way too windy. And so I don't know. I tried to find records of this, but there don't seem to be any of whether Smith and Raskob actually like really believed that they could use it as a docking for airships.
I
But
remember
anyway,
seeing pictures of that. Guys, you can go to Google, type in Empire State Building airships, and yeah, it's late 20s, early 30s. They
right.
have
But that
one
I want to just to
picture.
jump in. That's a simulation. Like they it was kind of like the early version of Photoshop. So it's kind of this sort of kind of how do I put this? It's kind of showing what it would look like if an airship could dock, but it actually never really happened.
So it never happened. Interesting. I was always blown away that that was even thought about. Yeah. Like you said, people coming over from Europe, that would be pretty clever if you think about it, right?
Oh, absolutely. It's an awesome idea. I mean, because you could, you don't have to go through airport security. I mean, maybe they have some kind of security, but you basically just land in the middle of the city. You don't have, if you're in JFK or Newark Airport and you want to get to Midtown, I mean, it takes like over an hour. So here you are, literally in Midtown as soon as your ship lands. It's a great
Man.
idea, but it just wasn't practical.
Yeah. Well, yeah, that is mind blowing. But I'm looking at your the cover of this book. It's just crazy. So yeah, Shanghai Tower is almost double the size of Empire, but the biggest one in the world is the what are they? Is it the Burj Khalifa? Is that how you say that?
Exactly.
And
Yes.
it's 2,700 feet. So
Right.
I mean, to build this, so you know the economics behind it, not just
Hmm.
I'm assuming you know some of the engineering, but the
Hmm.
economics. How
Hmm.
does it all come to be? Who is the investors? Is it basically funded by the state at first, and then they have investors? Like, what does this look like from start to finish?
Okay, good question. So, the original, um, so just one or quick two lines about Dubai. Dubai had started doing a lot of infrastructure development and trying to promote trade as early as the 50s. They never had as much oil as the other neighboring countries. So they tried to kind of use economic development and diversification relatively early in the game. Saudi Arabia is going to try to do that now, for example. But so there was a huge there was a former military base in the center of Dubai that became vacant. And so um,
In what
uh,
year?
that's a good question. It was probably in the early 2000s. Well, the original call for proposals from the developer to architects happened around 2002. So I would say in the late 1990s, this large lot became available. So I'm not exactly sure the year, but the conception of the project happened in the early 2000s. And so um, the development company is called Emar, and they started out as a very young company, but they had the backing of the Emars, the EMAAR. They had the backing of the of Sheikh Mohammed, who was the leader of Dubai. And basically, Sheikh Mohammed turned to Emar and said, "We want to make this big lot like a central neighborhood, really something to stand out." And so Emar went and got proposals from architects, and they wanted to make it the world's tallest building. They wanted to have the world's tallest building as a centerpiece. And then when the original plans were submitted to Sheikh Mohammed, he said, "Man, it's not tall enough. Make it taller. Make it taller." And so over I think it's a year or two of back and forth between Emar and the developer. I'm sorry, Emar and the architect, who was Adrian Smith, who used to be at SOM, who's like world renowned for art designing super tall skyscrapers. At the end of the day, they decided on something that was going to be 1/2 mile tall. So they just came up with that number because it was nice, nice,
It's
and
marketable, right?
it's
That's what it's
marketable.
very marketable.
Absolutely,
Yeah.
yeah. So that's kind of the background. They
And
wanted
and
to
real quick,
develop.
Real
Yeah.
quick, Dubai really started to invest in, I guess, in infrastructure in the 80s. I remember seeing videos or pictures of Dubai. I guess it was in the 70s and then 80s and then goes right in the 90s. And it's incredible to see the growth. So something happened in the 80s where they said we want to be a hub of new technology or just prestige lifestyle. Is that right? Something happened there, and
Yeah,
maybe the sheik
exactly.
was part of
So
it.
the Sheikh Mohammed's father, he was more about trade and just kind of there's a creek where ships can come in. So he dredged the creek and they built a big it's a dry dock which was for fixing broken ships and things like that. Then around the late 1990s, they said, you know what? We're on the Persian Gulf. We have really clear blue water. It's literally like 80, 90 degrees year round. The sand along the beaches is just, nice perfect sand. And so they really came up with this plan to turn Dubai just from a kind of like a mercantile city into something that's tourism. And yeah, they attracted media. They came up with like sort of a special media zone, a special finance zone, a special tech zone. So they were luring international companies to come there. And then what happens is these companies come there and they bring in workers from, the United States or England, for example. So they have a large expat community. The other thing too is they get a lot of low, sort of low wage workers from like India and from Southeast Asia. So it's a very, in some sense, it's a very international city in the sense that you have a lot of expats working in finance, expats working in real estate. And the other thing is around 2002, they decided to open up the real estate market in Dubai to international investment. So before that, if you only the only households that could invest or buy real estate were the residents. But then they made it an international real estate hub, and so
Ooh, it
there's
just
just been a
boomed, probably.
tremendous inflow of people who wanted to have like an apartment condo and a high rise, and then they can go hang out on the beach, go shopping. Yeah. So Dubai around late 1990s, early 2000s really refocused on this idea of tourism, of sort of attracting global companies, shopping, food. They try, if you go to the malls there's a million malls. I mean, it's so hot, so much of the much of the shopping and stuff is in these giant malls, and there's every place has a star chef restaurant, things like
You mean
that.
in the building itself?
Now, well, actually, okay. So the funny thing about the Burj Khalifa is the basement. You enter the observatory through the basement. The basement is part of the mall. That mall is literally the world's largest mall. So
Wow.
the whole development of what's called downtown Dubai is not just the world's tallest building. It's like literally the world's tallest building sits atop the world's largest mall, which and then you go outside of the mall into the plaza, and then there's this enormous water fountain and the restaurants around the water fountain. And it's this massive development. And then around that are super tall apartment buildings, 40, 50-story tall apartment buildings. So so the one important thing about this is because Emaar owns all the properties, not just the Burj. They didn't develop just the Burj Khalifa and the mall, but they also developed the apartment buildings that surround the Burj Khalifa. And so as a result, those units, I was crunched some numbers. The apartment units that have a Burj Khalifa view sell for about 15% more than the ones that face the other parts of the city. So just the increased revenue from the apartment sales of those apartments facing the Burj Khalifa, that probably alone paid for the tower itself. So it was a very clever economic development strategy.
Wow. You mean they just made this incredible attraction to draw enough eyeballs so people would want to live there, and then they funded it technically, I guess, maybe on the back end or front end with real estate around it.
Exactly. I mean, indirectly, that's exactly right. Having said that, the Burj Khalifa has an amazing observatory, and that too is very profitable. The units the residential units are very expensive and they're very expensive to maintain. So maybe a shorter building would have been more profitable from that perspective, because the maintenance costs are so high and things like that. But from a total big picture view, which includes the value of the properties, the observatory, the drawing the tourists to the mall and things like this, it was a very profitable and very insightful project, in my
Mm.
opinion.
Now, how much money does it take to build that, or even something comparable? Let's just say something in New York City, obviously the One World Tower, which is still nothing compared to this. But what's it cost? How long does it take? And is it basically, like you said, it really starts with the vision of the person in charge, which it sounds like that's the Sheikh. Is that how you say it? Sheikh?
Yeah,
Sheikh.
yeah, Sheikh Mohammed. Well, that's a good question. So there's a lot of things to unfold here, but the cost of building these things really depends on location, both the location in the city and location across the world. So, like I said, with the case of the Burj Khalifa, the labor costs were very, very low because they were able to get a lot of construction workers who were, they're more or less temporary workers. They come on short-term contracts. And so, there's some question about working conditions and things like this. But the bottom line is that the labor costs in a place like Dubai are just a fraction of what they are in New York. So if you look at New York, for example, one is it one Vanderbilt, which was recently a super tall office building built next to Grand Central Terminal, that cost about 3 billion. So if you want a tall office building in New York, it's going to run about 3 billion. In Dubai, the Burj Khalifa was, from what I can tell, cost about 2.2 billion.
Look at this. The
Yeah.
difference from America to Dubai, probably because of regulations, labor, right? Contracts,
Yeah, exactly.
agreements,
So labor costs are a big part of it,
unions.
and I mean regulations do matter because they just drag out the project. They make it longer and things like this. So, um, in China, again, I think the Shanghai Tower, which is now I think the third tallest in the world, I think that cost about 2 billion or so. So. Yeah,
Wow.
so if you have a couple of billion, you can build yourself a super tall skyscraper.
So time frame, obviously different from location to location. I would think that in Dubai, they're way faster than here in America, just in my opinion. So what's the time frame to
Yeah, that's
build
a
one of
good
these?
question. I mean, I would say for a super tall, it's usually probably about 5 years. If you really keep pushing at it, it's be about 5 years from groundbreaking to opening for the construction part. Obviously, the planning, can take 2 or 3 more years. And then, in New York, you have to buy the land. In the case of the Burj Khalifa, it was like, okay, we have this big lot. Sheikh Mohammed said, okay, Imar, here's the lot. Go ahead and do what you wanted. Make a world class development out of it. Um, so, probably if you're looking at like the land to, getting the land, going through the whole architecture design process, going through the regulatory process, the construction process, talking about a decade at least.
What can we learn from some of these big players in this world? Obviously, there are certain architects, certain engineers that will only do the big buildings, right?
Hmm.
It's like they're the experts in it. But what can we learn from it? Because there's a lot of people who listen to this that are in real estate.
Hmm.
Maybe the fact that the one building now is the tallest in the world and the
Hmm.
former tallest in the world loses value, or maybe there is a race that's going on amongst certain developers. What is something that could be a great takeaway from all of this?
Yeah, that's a that's a good question. Well, okay, so to make the world's I'll do my best in an answer, but if you
Yeah.
want me to follow up or go in a different direction, just let me know. But first of all, the world's tallest building, it just takes so many moons to align. And in the 21st century, they don't necessarily work as standalone projects. The old days, the Empire State Building, people don't realize this about the Empire State Building, but it actually worked as a standalone project, or it would have if the Great Depression had not come along. And the Great Depression was something that nobody was predicting. So I don't think we can use that as a good measure. But standalones don't tend to work. So for the super talls, they work because they help increase the land values around. They help draw tourists and things like that. So really, if you really want to get in the super tall game, you got to figure out whether such a project would work as a standalone. And most of the time, it's not. If you own the land around the properties, then you can get a huge benefit from that sort of spillover value. So that's kind of one lesson. Whether there's competition or not, there's always competition, but competition is systematic to sort of the way our economies work. I think it's kind of funny that people say, "Oh, super tall buildings are just because of ego and monuments to the developer," but they're business people and they're not crazy. And these super talls, they actually work, but they're rare. They're hard because you have to have the right look for a super tall to work. It has to be in a beautiful central location. It has to be in a city that's growing very rapidly or has a very strong diversified economy. You can't build, there's this proposal to build this the world's tallest tower in Oklahoma City, not the world's tallest tower, the tallest tower in the United States in Oklahoma City. I've crunched the numbers and I've not crunched the numbers exactly, but I've looked at the size of the tower relative to the population, and that's like I have a hard time believing that would pencil out in terms of the costs and things like that. But there's a developer who wants to build this in Oklahoma City, so I'd be shocked if it's completed. But he's trying to get the word out, trying to get some promotion about that.
So when it comes to tenants, I'm thinking that these are extremely vetted tenants where to even get into this building, whether it's to live there or to have a business there,
Hmm.
they're very protective of this. So like when you talk about the economics, I'm obviously thinking, what does it take to get into these high rises? Because if you are going to be in a very high destination area, such as the world's tallest building or one of the world's tallest buildings, the premium is insane, but maybe the return on investment is worth it. So, what's it look like for somebody who wants to be a part of this or live there?
Hey, that's a great question. So if you start with the business side of things, the businesses that tend to occupy these super tall towers tend to be um, sort of global businesses. They tend to be international companies, and so they want to be in a super tall tower to kind of tell the world, okay, we have a global presence, we're a big profitable company. The truth is, if they're not, then people are wondering like, why is this company not in a super tall tower? So,
Yeah, that's right. Yeah,
um,
it's a credibility thing, am I right?
exactly. It's totally credibility. It's a kind of advertising, so so in New York City, for example, there's this huge kind of empty office problem. But if you look at the across the different types of buildings, that's super high end, the brand new buildings, what they call a class A, those have very little problem finding tenants. It's the older buildings that were built in the 60s, 70s, 80s that are having trouble finding tenants because they're a bit older and they don't have the kind of cachet that these new towers have, like Hudson Yards, which has just recently completed a set of office towers um, near the Hudson River near Penn Station. Those are doing well because they're really drawing the top companies. Um, so the lure for super tall offices is really the cachet, amazing views, and that's the other thing. Workers get this amazing perk. They have these amazing views, and they just get to say, I work on the 50th floor, and I think people like that. And there's something similar at work with residences. People like being on the higher floors. They're willing to pay more. I've looked at this, crunched the numbers, and there's about a little bit less than 1% per floor premium. Meaning, if you're on the 20th floor, and let's say the unit is $100,000, just make up
Yeah.
numbers, and you're on 10 floors higher, you'll probably be paying 110,000. You'll probably be paying about 10,000 more simply just to be on 10 floors higher.
So a 1% on average, every floor you rise is a little bit more money. That's
Exactly. So with
interesting.
condo prices, exactly.
Wow, never even thought about that. Obviously that you figure the top tier ones, everybody wants to be one of the top, the highest. Never realized that there might be a mathematical equation in every floor.
Oh yeah, yeah. No, you look at the numbers, you look at the statistics, and you can fit a nice trend line where you have the height. Sorry, you have the height of the building. I'm sorry, and the price of the building and the height of the building, and you see this nice, real, like crystal
It's a
clear trend line. And it's well, part of it's the views, and part of it I think is just people like saying, I live on the 40th floor, I lived on the 50th floor. And this is not just the billionaire condos. I mean, the billionaire condos that you see in like Manhattan, those have that too, that upward pricing component. But in middle class and a little bit higher end, you still see it.
hmm. Now, I want to talk a little bit about insurance. I mean, I'm sure the insurance is insane, and there's really I've researched a little bit about insurances for certain buildings, including the World Trade Centers, Trade Center buildings, and how fascinating it is to see what happens when there's an incident and who really benefits from it. But before I get to that conspiracy theory talk, um, can you tell me a little bit about maybe the building of these buildings? I know Empire State Building, there's all kinds of really popular pictures of them building it and how guys are
Hmm.
just walking around.
Yeah.
And their study or their statistics that show X amount of people died building it, right? So regulations have gotten way crazier, probably. They have way safer ways of building stuff. So building the high skyscrapers, extremely dangerous. So are people still having incredible work accidents even during the construction of Dubai?
That's a good question. It's to be honest, it's not something I researched for the book or have researched. My own, I can't say much other than, things are getting safer. They're not walking on steel beams on
Yeah,
the
you
80th
know what
floor
I'm
like they
talking
used
about,
to.
right? Yeah.
And plus, a lot of these buildings are, they always enmeshed in netting, and they have elevators. People go up and down. They don't have to climb, and a lot of it is concrete pouring. So you're basically standing there on the floor, and then there's these concrete forms, and they pour the concrete in, and it dries, and then they go up. So I don't have a lot to say about safety. I mean, I didn't really start counting casualty rates or anything like that by building, but it's an
Yeah.
interesting question.
Well, I figured you probably have come across something, and maybe it's kind of morbid to put it in a book about skyscrapers, but when it comes to even the construction, how has the construction changed from the 40s, 50s, maybe 30s, whatever, till
Hmm.
now? You just talked about concrete. I would think that everything is still using steel. Maybe the steel is not coming from US steel like the ones did. It's coming from, Nippon Steel, which is now owning of US Steel, but it comes from Japan.
Right.
So anything that's different from back in the day till now that you've noticed?
Well, I would say, I mean, in terms of the construction, steel is actually a decreasing amount of use in tall buildings. The use of steel versus concrete, it depends on a whole number of things, but New York City relies more on steel buildings just because kind of its history. But if you look at the world, across the world, buildings tend to be what they call composite. They're kind of hybrid buildings where the columns and the central core will be concrete, and then sometimes the horizontal beams will be steel. So that's called a composite building, and that structurally is better than an all steel building uh, because of the, let's just say, the physics of building a steel beams with concrete columns is actually makes the building lighter and stronger at the same time. So there's a lot of high strength concrete uh, buildings now. That's kind of the predominant form around the world, especially for residential buildings. High strength concrete is better. It helps with the wind bracing, and you don't have to worry about having these large floor spans, because if you have apartment buildings, the distance from the central core to the outside of the building is much smaller. And so basically with concrete, you create a form of wood, on each floor. You pour the concrete, it dries, you go to the next one and go to the next one. And so um, really the way they build these super towers with concrete, that's but then there's all kinds of technologies related to elevators, related to the structural forms and things like this. So the real problem with super talls is the wind. So you have to come up with a way to make the building resist the wind so people don't feel the building sway.
Hmm.
That's the biggest, that's essentially the biggest obstacle.
So in the Burj Khalifa, there is a sway. There, I mean,
Okay, let me say this. All buildings sway. It's just economically not possible to build a perfectly stiff building. The trick is to make it so that people don't feel the sway. In other words, on windy days, the building will move to the side. If the engineering is done correctly, the buildings will move ever so slightly that it won't be perceived by by.
that's
And there's
so
a rule. I
crazy.
think it's 1 foot for every. I think it's a building shouldn't move laterally more than 1 foot for every 500 feet vertically. So if you have a 500-foot building and it doesn't move more than 1 foot in a typical wind condition, it won't affect you won't get seasick or anything like that.
You're telling me that potentially that the Burj Khalifa is, let's just say 20, it's 2,700 feet, but for simple
Yeah,
math,
right.
2,500 feet,
Yeah.
that technically there's an allowance of it swaying 5 feet.
Yeah, yeah. But it happens so slowly. That's the idea. And then there's some tricks to slow that down. So I don't know. So a lot of buildings, I have to see. I'm not sure. A lot of buildings have what's called tuned mass dampers. I'm not sure if there's one in the Burj or not, but what? So you basically put this giant weight hangs on a spring basically. And so what happens when the building sways, this weight starts to move in the opposite direction. It's kind of like a giant pendulum. So one of the tricks to slow down the building so you don't feel it sway is these tuned mass dampers. And so um, that's an easy quote unquote easy trick. That saves a lot of concrete because um, you don't have to make the building as stiff if you have one of these mass dampers moving so the building moves this way, the damper moves this way, and then it can kind of stabilize the building. That's a big trick.
Man, that's unbelievable. I want to clip
So
that one moment.
there's a funny story with the Twin Towers, if I may. So they
Yeah.
when they were building when they were engineering the Twin Towers, they didn't know at that point. This was the early late 60s how much sway people could tolerate. So what they did was they put they quote unquote tricked people. They created a fake office, a fake office for eye exams, and they put it on like this bed with springs. And so they asked people to they said, come into this office, we'll give you a free eye exam. And when the people were like reading those eye charts, they started to move the building and very slowly at first, and then a little bit quicker. And so they'd observe the exact point at which people could feel this way and get sick. So they did some studies on human sensitivity. This was in the late 60s. And so when they realized the amount of movement that people could tolerate, that's how they designed the build. From that point on, they figured, okay, this is how we're going to design the buildings. How much sway.
Wow, that is insane. So as they were building it, they were doing it, or right
No,
before
no,
they started
before,
building it?
well, while they were designing the engineering part.
Oh
So
my God, is
they
that
added a few
interesting?
other, yeah, yeah. So, and actually, I read somewhere that the Twin Towers during a hurricane could move 13 feet. So if you're in a hurricane and you're on the top, you're whatever, 1,500 feet in the air, you're probably not going to be able to relax. But if it's just an ordinary day, and even if it gets windy, these things are pretty well designed.
Jeez. Fine. So you've obviously you write for a blog. I think it's Skynomics blog. Is that right?
Correct.
And so, do you go to these buildings? Do you travel around and actually see these, I guess, skyscrapers in person? All of them?
For the book, yeah, I traveled to Dubai. I was in Shanghai. I was in Hong Kong. I go to Chicago. I was Chicago, obviously New York, Empire State Building. So for the book, I did London too. Even though we don't think of London as a super tall city, it's definitely building high rises and skyscrapers. So Yeah, so for the book, I got on an airplane and went to these places.
All right,
Shenzhen,
which one was the most impressive? Is there any good stories that tied to any of them?
that's a good question. I mean, the thing about the Burj is amazing is because remember, Dubai is in a desert. So what you see are these massive skyscrapers just rising up out of the desert, and it's a really crazy experience. I was in Shanghai. Went to the top of the Shanghai Tower. That's pretty cool because you could just see how tall and how much high rise let me just say how much high rise living and working uh, is part of the Shanghai culture. We don't realize this, but in the United States, you live in a single family house in the suburbs. That's kind of like the norm. In Shanghai and Chinese cities, living in high-rise apartment buildings, that's the norm. This idea of freestanding house in the suburbs in Shanghai or China more broadly doesn't really exist. So you see these just towers, 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 and that's how most of the people they buy their apartment in these super tall tower complexes. And that's middle class. It's not just rich like, in New York.
Did you go to the top of them? Any of them?
Well, I mean, I went to the top of Shanghai Tower and oh, actually, okay, it's kind of a funny story. I think there's a city in northern China that had a program with Rutgers. So I went there to teach for 2 weeks. And one of the faculty members, as he was a junior faculty member, and he said, come visit, come to my house. I'll show you my house. And so it was like in a super tall tower, but his apartment was like a small one bedroom on the 40th floor. And this guy's a junior faculty, he doesn't make a lot of money, but to him that was like the coolest thing on the world. So that's an example of just, going into somebody's home. It'll be an apartment, could be 40-story apartment building, one bedroom, and that's just kind of, somebody who gets a regular salary. And actually, the other thing I'll say is I have a graduate student now, and he's from China, and it's the same thing. He was living in the city of Shenzhen, which is in the southern China near Hong Kong, and he said, with his parents, they just bought an apartment, and they asked him what floor he wanted to live on. He picked the highest floor. They have some kind of rules how they allocate floors, but he wanted to be on the highest floor, and he's just an ordinary guy, and his dream is to have an apartment on a high floor.
That's pretty awesome. That is awesome. That's possible even.
Well, Hong Kong definitely paved the way. Hong Kong started building high-rise, sort of middle class, high-rise housing in the 60s and 70s. And when China started reforming its economy in the late 1970s, early 80s, they sort of just adopted that kind of approach. Same thing they adopted the approach from Hong Kong and also from Singapore, where high-rise living is sort of for everyone.
Well, have you seen the documentary on I think it's Netflix or one of the channels about the Skywalker? He's the individual that did the tightrope across the World Trade Centers. Um,
I haven't seen it in a while, but I know what you're talking about.
Incredible story, but it's just unbelievable that was even possible. Anyways, I have to ask you about, obviously World Trade Center stories or anything that you've come across. So obviously, if you know anything about when it comes to insurance, the owner of the World Trade Center, both of them, I think both, yeah, he insured them just a couple months. He re-upped the insurance to an insane amount a few months before the attack. Now that could be completely coincidence or who knows, but I'm assuming. I mean, that person became extremely wealthy. I think his name is Larry. Do you know the owner of World Trade Center
Yeah,
back in the day?
Silverstein. Yeah, so
Silverstein.
right.
Yep. So he became, yeah, he got billions of dollars or something. But I would think that number one, do you know any stories about that? And number two, how has skyscraper development changed post 9/11?
So I don't have any stories about the Twin Towers other than to say, yeah, no, I don't have any stories about that. It's a tragic event, and I'll just leave it at that.
Yeah.
Um, so the question is about how it's changed. Wait, how is what was the question? Sorry, skyscraper development changed or
Yeah, post 9/11, I'm
oh
thinking with
oh
everything that happened, number one, there was because it's definitely a target, right? You have skyscrapers that the bigger they get, the easier they are to hit with planes. So my assumption is now maybe New York City has a regulatory amount, or maybe there's certain things that be put in place, or I would just think the world changed post 9/11 when it comes to development of these skyscrapers. So has it, or am I just completely off on that?
no, yes and no. I mean the world's okay. So on just what's happening, the world's tallest buildings are getting taller. There's more skyscrapers more than ever. So in some sense, 9/11 was in the long history of the tall buildings. 9/11 really didn't kind of change the upward trajectory. What it did do is just focus people more on safety issues. So with the Twin Towers, the core was steel. And so what happened was when the jet fuel melted some of the steel beams in the core, it started to collapse and the weight just sort of um, the weight of the upper floors just sort of smashed the weight of the lower floors, and the whole thing just kind of imploded. Today, all cores, the central core, which has the elevator and the stairwells and things, are all concrete. And so something like that couldn't happen because it just could withstand fire. So
Wow.
so the problem wasn't so much the weight of the airplane, it was just the heat that melted the steel, and then when the steel buckled, it just sort of triggered this cascade. So today, all cores are concrete, and so that kind of problem won't happen. In China, they have regulations what are called refuge floors. So where they have the plant and equipment, so they each maybe 20, 30 floors, they'll just have one floor devoted towards like mechanical equipment, HVAC stuff, electricity, water tanks. And so they'll put an extra enclosed room. And so this way you can have basically a safe, every 20 or 30 floors, it would just be a safe floor that if there's a fire somewhere in the building, you could just hang out in that room and it's sort of perfectly enclosed. And this way you don't necessarily have to evacuate immediately. You can stay in a safe environment for a while.
Hmm.
And then, obviously getting into buildings today, I mean, it's impossible. You can't just walk into an office building anymore. So in that sense,
Security has increased quite a bit in these areas,
yeah,
right? Yeah.
absolutely. So security is dramatically increased. And so I would say that the in summary, the lasting effects of 9/11 are just greater insecurity and a whole host of innovations in building design and safety that just make these buildings much safer against all kinds of bad possibilities.
So I have to ask you, so that it sounds like you do, but you are in these circles. I see it on social media. Jet fuel cannot melt steel. So are you saying that you've talked to enough engineers that that is absolutely false and that
Oh,
jet fuel
well,
can
look,
melt
I
steel?
can't argue with you on that because it seems you have a perception of this, but that's what happened. I mean, the bottom line is the jet fuel destroyed the 12 twin towers. I mean, this is scientific fact. So
Yeah.
I'm not a physicist, but uh,
By the way, I'm not either. I kind of hear these things. I see them, and it has to. You're the foremost expert that I've talked to, so I have to see what you think or what you've heard from other engineers. So, because the conspiracies are out there, right? That's impossible. How could that happen, especially within an hour of each other? So unique situation, but it sounds like from your experience that that is the case. Is that right?
yeah, the twin towers fell because of two airplanes going into each tower, and the
And
jet
then the
fuel
jet fuel.
destroyed the central core. I mean, that's just a fact.
Yeah.
We could make up anything we want. We could say, can the twin towers were destroyed by Martians, but uh, that's that's just making up stuff. So if people want to make up stuff, they're just deluding themselves as to the facts. So I'll just leave it to that.
Yeah, I didn't know about that. The new construction though is concrete, not steel. That's fascinating. Oh my God. I love hearing that. At least they started to make many changes going forward, and it seems like a lot of innovation.
Yeah, so it's interesting with the Petronas Towers in Kuala Lumpur. They didn't have a steel industry, and so they wanted to build these two world's tallest buildings, and so they had a much more developed concrete industry. People, the developer and sorry, contracting companies were much more familiar working with concrete. So they said, we want to build this two twin towers in concrete. So find us a way to do it. And I think it was Samsung. Well, anyway, one of the contracting companies, they figured out how to do a very high strength concrete, and they built these two towers all in concrete, and that took off
Wow.
around the world.
Wow, I didn't know anything about that. That's interesting. And so when it comes to and I guess right now the big name obviously is the Burj Khalifa. That's how it's built then?
Yeah, it's yeah, exactly. It's all I mean, it's like 90% concrete. The spire itself is steel, but it's just easier to build the spire that way. But the whole building itself is concrete. Yeah. So
Wow.
yeah, exactly. Yeah.
How about on the horizon? I think you brought up Oklahoma as one, but is there any competitors out there that's trying to take over the world's tallest building? Anything on the
Yeah,
horizon?
yeah, absolutely. So, really, the next tallest building is most likely to be in Saudi Arabia, in the city of Riyadh, not Riyadh, sorry, Jeddah. So in 2010, they announced the Jeddah Tower, which was supposed to be 1 kilometer. So if the Burj Khalifa is
Two
point
point.
0.8,
Oh my God.
so it got halted. There was, some political turmoil in Saudi Arabia, and I think it was in 2018 it got halted. It looks like this tower is going to restart, so it's most likely that the next world's tallest building will be in Jeddah in, let's say, 5 years from now, and it'll be 1 kilometer, 0.62 miles rather than zero point 0.5 miles.
My God. That is crazy. Yeah, 1 kilometer, point six, you said point 0.6 miles. Oh my God. That's wild. All right, so and that's coming out of Saudi Arabia. Anything in the US? Anybody trying to do anything, or is it pretty
No, to
much
do the world to do a record breaker like that in the U.S., it's just too many hurdles, and it's not clear. Again, you have to have a large lot where you can get increased property values really to make it work. As a standalone project, the economics, it's not great. So the only thing in the works that people have been talking about is this Oklahoma City Tower, which it would be 1,907 feet if completed. My
still not even close to it? Yeah.
my sort of odds of it being completed are about 10 or 15%,
Oh, that's cool though. At least they're trying. I mean, I just love innovation in
Oh yeah, no,
general.
I believe me, I applaud real bold thinking. But at the end of the day, a lot of these super tall buildings, they work. The economics work. So the reason why many of them are proposed but don't get built is because when you start crunching the numbers, it just doesn't add up. So, you know.
So, oil-rich cities. I think that's a chapter in your book. It seems like there's definitely a trend. Am I right? Saudi Arabia, and I believe Dubai is very
Yeah,
heavily.
Dubai will probably, if Saudi Arabia does 1 kilometer. Actually, you know what? In Riyadh, the city of Riyadh in Saudi Arabia, there's some proposals being a proposal being circulated for a 2 kilometer building, which would be greater than a mile. So who knows if that will ever be built? But developers love to offer these renderings, these drawings, and it just gets a lot of buzz. So a lot of it's just buzz and but again, developers by and large, they know what they're doing. They can, figure out the revenues, they can figure out the cost pretty well. So um a lot of
Yeah.
them get proposed, but they just don't add up.
And so, last question I have for you: when it comes to these, is it more so about pride of a city or a nation, or is it really a business move to draw a lot of eyeballs to increase an economy, or is it really about legacy, right? You want to be the country that built the world's tallest building. So, what is the main premise? Probably various intentions and incentives for these people, but what have you
Yeah.
noticed amongst these?
No, I'd say it's multi-layered. I mean, the leaders at the top often subsidize it or promote it because they want to get tourism. They want to get direct foreign direct investment. They want to lure big national corporations. They just want to be known as like a city or a country that is part of the global economy. So if the leaders like it for that reason, the developers like it, obviously for the same reason that the leaders like it, but they like this idea of the observatories, the spillovers. People in the city like it. I mean, remember, New York City did this with the Empire State Building, and for 40 years it was the world's tallest building. And I think really that set the precedent. And I think other cities were like, well, they have the Empire State Building. We want something like it because we know at the end of the day, citizens respond to those buildings with a sense of, that's my building in my city, and everyone wants a piece of that. So I think more broadly, it happens from the top to the developers, but more broadly, if the residents of cities didn't feel that it gave them a sense of pride and a sense of place, then there would be many fewer of these towers.
So in a sense, it is an absolute marketing move, right? You want to make sure your tribe is proud of where they live, but also you want to uh, rein in eyeballs that you are at the you're at the cutting edge of
Yeah, no, I agree.
innovation and
Absolutely.
technology.
Absolutely. Right. These buildings are showcases of modern technology. Absolutely.
Yeah, the modern day pyramids. Well, pyramids to me are the
Well, they
most
didn't build those
impressive things.
pyramids for technology. They built those pyramids for the past. These buildings are built for the future, so they held the dead.
Yeah,
These housed
that's
the
a good,
living.
yeah, that's a good way to put it, man. Yeah, I like that. Or did we build that? There's another conspiracy out there,
Oh,
right? That's
well,
pyramids. How long did they take, right? There's all that talk, but I don't know much about it except for those are extremely impressive even to this day. That how could
absolutely.
it ever be made, right?
And the idea of solving problems, engineering problems, that's part of it too. It just building a tall building naturally piques the curiosity of many people. So how do we solve this problem? How do we get all the pieces lined up and all this? And I think that's part of it. It's just the sheer fun and the sheer fun of just trying to solve the problem of how to build a super tall building, how to make money, and how to make it so people are happy with it and comfortable inside. And it's just an amazing challenge, I think.
Well, you traveled around the world. You were a part of the most impressive things on Earth, basically, man-made in the past 100 years. And man, I envy that, man. So I respect that you actually travel to these locations. And in your book, you documented, I'm assuming, the journey, but also many details of these buildings. And guys, his book is coming out, I guess, on Tuesday, and that is the 14th, May 14th. You can pick up his book, Cities in the Sky, The Quest to Build the World's Tallest Skyscrapers. And you can go to citiesinthesky.com, I believe I saw in the notes. Is that
Well,
right?
it's citiesintheskybook.com.
Got it. Okay. Citiesintheskybook.com.
Citiesintheskybook.com. Yeah,
Beautiful. Okay. You got the domain. Very smart. We always
exactly.
recommend that. So, yeah, I have to say, Jason, this is I don't get to talk to people in this world too often, so I really appreciate you coming on and giving us your wisdom. And I'm going to use that 5 feet thing that the movement of the building, it
Yeah,
goes five
sure.
feet. I'm going to impress people at dinner tonight when I
Absolutely.
start talking
Perfect.
about it. Just so you know.
Beautiful. Excellent.
Jason, thanks so much, man. I appreciate your time.
Yeah, it was great. It was a lot of fun. Thanks.
Remember, guys, $1 million book will lead to $1 million life. Right on.